Theodora Montgomery clutched the worn leather satchel to her chest as she stumbled down the dirt road, the morning sun rising behind her, casting long shadows across the Colorado plains. Tears stained her cheeks, but she refused to look back at the only home she'd ever known, the home where her father had just told her never to return. It was June 1885, and at 20 years of age, Thea, to those who knew her well, found herself without family, without shelter, and with little more than the clothes on her back, and the meager possessions she'd managed to stuff into her bag before being forced out. All because she had refused to marry Harold Winstead, a man 30 years her senior with a cruel streak that made her blood run cold. A good match, her father had declared over dinner the previous evening. Harold has money, land, and no children to inherit it. He needs a wife and you need a husband. The matter is settled. But Thea had refused, knowing what happened to Harold's previous wives, one dead from mysterious circumstances, the other fled in the night, never to be heard from again. "I won't marry him, father," she had said firmly, hands trembling beneath the table. "He's not a good man." Her father's face had turned the color of a ripe beet. "You'll do as I say, girl. I won't keep feeding an ungrateful daughter who can't do the one thing women are put on this earth to do, make a respectable marriage." Now, as the morning dew soaked through her boots, Thea wondered where she would go. Ordway was a small town in southeastern Colorado, with few opportunities for a woman alone. The thought of finding work in the saloon made her stomach turn. She'd seen how those girls were treated, lost in her thoughts. Thea hardly noticed the approaching horse until it was nearly upon her. She jumped aside with a startled gasp, dropping her satchel into a puddle. "Whoa there, Tempest," a deep voice called out as the rider pulled his stallion to a halt. "My apologies, Miss Montgomery, didn't see you on the road." Thea looked up to see Quentin Nash atop his black stallion, his cowboy hat tipped back to reveal concerned blue eyes. The Nash ranch bordered her father's property to the west, and though they had been neighbors for 5 years, Thea had exchanged few words with the quiet rancher who kept mostly to himself. "Mr. Nash," she managed, hastily retrieving her now muddy satchel, "it's quite all right." He studied her tear-streaked face and the bag clutched in her trembling hands. "You're out mighty early and a ways from home. Everything all right?" Thea straightened her shoulders, unwilling to appear as broken as she felt. "I'm fine, thank you." Quentin dismounted in one fluid motion, his tall frame towering over her. At 28, he had the weathered look of a man who spent his days under the open sky, his skin tanned and his hands calloused from hard work. "Begging your pardon, Miss Montgomery, but you don't look fine." His eyes flicked to the satchel and back to her face. "Seems to me like you're going somewhere." A fresh wave of tears threatened, and Thea bit her lip hard to stop them. "I no longer have a home at my father's house," she admitted finally. "He has banished me for refusing to marry Mr. Winstead." Understanding dawned in Quentin's eyes, followed by a flash of something darker. "Harold Winstead, the cattle baron from over La Junta Way," Thea nodded miserably. "Father arranged it without consulting me. When I refused, he told me I was no longer welcome under his roof." Quentin's jaw tightened. "That ain't right," he said softly. "A woman shouldn't be forced into marriage, especially not with a man like Winstead." "You know him?" Thea asked. "Know of him," Quentin replied, his expression grim. "Nothing good." They stood in silence for a moment, the only sounds the gentle snorting of Quentin's horse and the morning birds beginning their songs. Thea was acutely aware of how improper their situation was, alone on a deserted road at dawn, but circumstances had already thrown propriety to the wind. "Where will you go?" Quentin asked finally. Thea shook her head. "I don't know. Perhaps to my aunt in Denver, though I have no money for the train fare." Quentin shifted his weight, seemingly wrestling with some inner debate. "Miss Montgomery, I don't mean to be forward, but I've got a proposition for you." Thea took an instinctive step back, her grip tightening on her satchel. Quentin raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Nothing untoward," he assured her quickly. "It's just, well, my housekeeper left last month to care for her ailing mother in Pueblo. The house is a disaster and I can't cook worth a damn. I could use help and you need a place to stay." Relief washed over her, followed immediately by uncertainty. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Nash, but it wouldn't be proper for me to stay in your home unchaperoned." Quentin nodded as if he'd anticipated this response. "That's fair. What if," he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully, "what if I offered you my name instead?" Thea stared at him, certain she had misheard. "Your name." "A marriage of convenience," he clarified, his cheeks coloring slightly. "You'd have a roof over your head, food on the table, and protection from Winstead. I'd have someone to keep house and cook proper meals. When things settle, if you want to leave for Denver or anywhere else, I wouldn't stop you." Thea's mind reeled. She had just escaped one unwanted marriage proposal only to receive another. Yet this one felt different. There was no demand in Quentin's eyes, only a sincere offer of help. "Why would you do this for me?" she asked, searching his face for any sign of deceit. Quentin looked down at his boots. "I know what it's like to be alone in this world, Miss Montgomery. No one should have to face that if they don't have to." There was something in his voice, a quiet understanding that resonated within her. She had seen him around town occasionally over the years, always polite but reserved, never joining in the rowdiness at the saloon like some of the other ranch hands. "I hardly know you," Thea said softly. "I know," he replied, "and I'm not asking for anything but your help with the house and maybe a decent meal now and then. The rest," he shrugged, "we can figure out as we go." Thea glanced back down the road toward her father's ranch, then ahead toward the uncertain future that awaited her. What choice did she really have? The money in her purse wouldn't last a week, and pride wouldn't keep her warm or fed. "All right, Mr. Nash," she said finally. "I accept your offer." Relief crossed his features. "Call me Quentin, please. If we're to be married, even in name only, we should be on a first-name basis." "Then you must call me Thea," she replied, the name feeling strange offered to this man she barely knew. Quentin nodded, then gestured to his horse. "Shall we then?" Town's opening up, and Reverend Phillips is usually at the church by now. Before she could respond, the sound of hoofbeats approached from the direction of her father's ranch. Thea turned to see 3 riders coming fast, her father in the lead, with Harold Winstead and one of his ranch hands close behind. "There she is!" her father shouted, his face twisted with anger even at this distance. Quentin moved swiftly, helping Thea onto his horse before mounting behind her. "Hold on," he murmured, spurring Tempest forward toward town. Thea clung to the saddle horn, heart hammering as they galloped down the road, her father's angry shouts fading behind them. The solid warmth of Quentin at her back felt surprisingly reassuring, his arms around her as he guided the horse steady and sure. They reached the small white church at the edge of Ordway just as Reverend Phillips was unlocking the doors. "Reverend," Quentin called, dismounting and helping Thea down. "Need your services this morning." The elderly minister looked between them with surprise. "Quentin Nash and Miss Montgomery, what's this about?" "We need to be married," Quentin said simply. "Right now, if you please." The Reverend's bushy eyebrows shot up. "This is rather sudden. Miss Montgomery, are you certain about this?" Before Thea could answer, the thunder of approaching horses reached them. She turned to see her father, Winstead, and the ranch hand pulling up to the church, dust billowing around them as they dismounted. "What's the meaning of this?" Thomas Montgomery demanded, striding toward them with his face flushed. "Theodora, come home this instant." Quentin stepped slightly in front of Thea. "Mr. Montgomery, your daughter has agreed to marry me." Winstead pushed forward, his florid face contorted with rage. "The girls promised to me, Nash. We had an agreement, Montgomery." "There was no agreement," Thea said firmly, finding her voice. "I never consented to marry you, Mr. Winstead." Her father's eyes narrowed. "You'll do as I say, girl. I'm still your father." "Not anymore," Thea replied, her voice trembling but determined. "You made that clear when you threw me out this morning." The Reverend looked between them all, clearly bewildered. "Perhaps we should all calm down and marry us now, Reverend," Quentin interrupted, his voice steady. "Please." Thomas Montgomery stepped forward, grabbing for Thea's arm. "I forbid this." Quentin moved with surprising speed, placing himself between Thea and her father. "You lost the right to forbid anything when you cast her out, sir." Winstead's hand moved to his belt, where a pistol hung heavy in its holster. "Step aside, Nash, the girl's mine." "I belong to no one," Thea declared, anger replacing her fear. "And I choose to marry Quentin Nash." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. The Reverend, sensing the volatility of the situation, made a quick decision. "Inside, quickly," he said, ushering Quentin and Thea toward the church doors. "Mr. Montgomery, Mr. Winstead, I suggest you both cool your tempers. Violence at God's house won't be tolerated." As they entered the church, Thea heard her father's furious voice. "You'll regret this, Theodora." "And you, Nash, you've made an enemy today." The heavy wooden doors closed behind them, muffling the threats. In the cool, dim interior of the small church, Thea found herself trembling from head to toe. "Are you all right?" Quentin asked quietly, his eyes searching hers. "Yes," she managed, though her voice shook. "Just frightened." "I won't let them harm you," he promised. The Reverend cleared his throat. "I need to be certain this is what you both want. Marriage is not something to enter into lightly, especially under such unusual circumstances." Thea looked at Quentin, this near stranger who had offered her protection when she needed it most. There was kindness in his eyes and steadiness in his manner. It wasn't love, but perhaps it was something she could build a life upon. "I'm certain," she said. Quentin nodded. "As am I." The ceremony was brief and simple. They exchanged vows before God and the Reverend, promising to honor and cherish each other until death parted them. When Quentin slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his mother's, he explained in a whisper. Thea felt a curious mix of gratitude and trepidation. "You may kiss your bride," the Reverend said finally. Quentin hesitated, then leaned down to place the gentlest of kisses on Thea's lips. It was over in an instant, but the warmth of his touch lingered. "Mrs. Nash," he said softly, testing the sound of her new name. Thea managed a smile. "Mr. Nash." Outside, her father and Winstead were gone, but Thea knew this wasn't the end of their troubles. As Quentin helped her onto his horse once more, she wondered what kind of life awaited her at the Nash Ranch and what kind of man her new husband truly was. The Nash Ranch sat nestled against rolling hills 3 miles outside of Ordway. As they approached, Thea took in the modest but well-maintained 2-story house, the sturdy barn, and the corrals where several horses grazed peacefully. It wasn't as grand as her father's sprawling property, but there was something inviting about its simplicity. "It's not much," Quentin said, misinterpreting her silence for disappointment, "but it's paid for and the land's good." "It's lovely," Thea assured him. "Truly." He helped her down from the horse and carried her satchel to the porch. When he opened the front door, Thea couldn't help but smile at his embarrassed expression as she surveyed the interior. "I warned you about the state of things," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. The main room was cluttered with books, newspapers, and discarded clothing. Dishes were piled in the kitchen sink, and a fine layer of dust covered most surfaces. Yet beneath the mess, Thea could see good bones, solid furniture, well-crafted cabinets, clean windows that let in streams of sunlight. "Nothing a day's work won't fix," she said, already rolling up her sleeves. "You don't have to start right away," Quentin protested. "You've had a trying morning." Thea shook her head. "I'd rather keep busy. It helps me not to think too much." Understanding flickered in his eyes. "All right, then. I need to check on the herd, but I'll be back by noon. Make yourself at home. It's your house now, too." After he left, Thea stood in the middle of the room, the enormity of what had just happened washing over her. She was married to a man she barely knew, living in a house that wasn't hers, wearing a ring that had belonged to another woman. Pushing aside her uncertainty, she set to work. By the time Quentin returned, she had swept, dusted, and organized the main room, washed the dishes, and started a stew with the provisions she found in the pantry. He stopped in the doorway, his eyes widening as he took in the transformation. "You've been busy." "It helps me feel useful," she replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "I hope you don't mind that I used some of your supplies for lunch." "Mind, I haven't had a proper home-cooked meal in weeks." He inhaled deeply. "Smells wonderful." They ate at the small kitchen table, an awkward silence stretching between them. Thea found herself studying him when he wasn't looking, the way his dark hair curled slightly at his collar, the strong line of his jaw, the careful way he handled his utensils despite his calloused hands. "This is good," he said finally. "The stew, thank you. You're welcome." Thea hesitated, then added, "I should thank you for what you did today. Not many men would have offered such kindness to a woman in my position." Quentin looked up, meeting her eyes. It wasn't entirely selfless. "I've been alone a long time. Having someone here," he gestured vaguely. "It's nice." "How long have you lived alone?" Thea asked, curious about this quiet man who was now her husband. "Since my pa died 5 years back. Ma passed when I was just 16. His expression grew distant. "Pa and I came out from Missouri after that, started this place together." "I'm sorry for your losses," Thea said softly. "My mother died when I was 12, influenza." Quentin nodded. "Hard thing, losing a mother young." Another silence fell, less awkward this time. When they finished eating, Quentin rose to help with the dishes, a gesture that surprised her. "You don't have to," she began. "My house, my mess," he said simply. "Besides, my ma raised me better than to let a lady do all the work." As they stood side by side at the sink, Thea washing while Quentin dried, she felt a curious sense of domesticity, as if they had done this many times before. It was strangely comforting. "I made up the spare room for myself," she told him. "I hope that's acceptable." Relief crossed his features. "Of course, I meant what I said, Thea. This is a marriage of convenience, nothing more. I won't expect anything of you." She nodded, grateful for his understanding. "Thank you." That night, lying in the narrow bed in what had once been Quentin's mother's sewing room, Thea listened to the unfamiliar creaks and groans of the house, the distant lowing of cattle, and the soft footsteps of her new husband in the room across the hall. Sleep eluded her as she wondered what the coming days would bring. The first week passed in a blur of domestic activity. Thea threw herself into transforming the neglected house into a proper home, cleaning every corner, organizing the pantry, even planting a small vegetable garden behind the kitchen. Quentin left early each morning to tend to the ranch work, returning tired but visibly pleased with the changes she made. They settled into a routine breakfast together at dawn, then separate duties until supper, when they would share the events of their day. Quentin, Thea discovered, was a good listener, attentive to her observations and respectful of her opinions. Sometimes in the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Colorado sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. It was during one such evening, 8 days after their hasty wedding, that the peace was shattered. The sound of approaching horses brought Quentin to his feet, his hand moving instinctively to the rifle propped beside the door. "Stay here," he told Thea, stepping off the porch into the gathering dusk. 3 riders approached. Thea recognized Winstead's ranch foreman and 2 hands she'd seen at her father's property. They pulled up short of the house, keeping their horses dancing nervously. "Evening, Nash," the foreman called, his tone falsely cordial. "Just passing along a message from Mr. Winstead." "I'm not interested in anything Winstead has to say," Quentin replied, his voice steady but with an edge of steel. "He says you stole something that belongs to him. Says you'd better return it or there'll be consequences." Thea stood, moving to stand beside Quentin despite his earlier instruction. "I belong to no one," she said clearly. "Tell Mr. Winstead I made my choice freely." The foreman's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Winstead doesn't take kindly to being crossed, madam. Neither does your father. They're offering $100 for Nash to annul the marriage and send you home." "Not interested," Quentin said flatly. "Now get off my land." "Might want to reconsider," one of the other men said, hand resting on his holstered pistol. $100 is a lot of money, more than she's worth, I'd wager." Quentin took a step forward, his stance threatening. "Insult my wife again, and you won't leave here on that horse." The tension crackled in the air like lightning before a storm. Thea placed a hand on Quentin's arm, feeling the coiled muscle beneath his shirt. "Please," she said quietly, "they're not worth it." After a long, tense moment, the foreman spat on the ground. "Have it your way, Nash." "But this ain't over." He wheeled his horse around. "Winstead always gets what he wants, one way or another. They watched in silence as the three men rode away, dust billowing in their wake. When they were out of sight, Quentin's shoulders slumped slightly. "I'm sorry," Thea whispered. "I've brought this trouble to your door." Quentin turned to her, his expression softening. "None of this is your fault. Winstead's a bully who's used to getting his way." He hesitated. "But things might get difficult if you want to reconsider." "No," Thea said firmly, "I won't go back. Not to my father, and certainly not to that man." Something like admiration flickered in Quentin's eyes. "You're braver than you give yourself credit for." That night, Thea added a chair beneath her bedroom doorknob before climbing into bed. Not because she feared Quentin in the short time she'd known him. He had shown nothing but respect and kindness, but because Winstead's threats had left her feeling vulnerable in a way she hadn't before. The trouble escalated quickly. The next morning, they discovered one of Quentin's prize bulls dead in the pasture, its throat cut. 2 days later, a section of fence was torn down, allowing a dozen cattle to wander onto neighboring land. Each incident came with no witnesses, but the message was clear. "This has to stop," Thea said one evening, watching Quentin clean his rifle at the kitchen table after a long day repairing fences. "Perhaps if I spoke to the sheriff." "Sheriff Dawson's in Winstead's pocket," Quentin replied grimly. "Has been for years." "Then my father." "He's always been stubborn, but surely he wouldn't condone destruction of property." Quentin set down the rifle, fixing her with a serious gaze. "Your father and Winstead are thick as thieves in this. I heard in town today that they've made some kind of deal. Winstead gets you, your father gets a piece of Winstead's holdings." Thea felt sick. "He's selling me like livestock." "I won't let that happen," Quentin said, his voice low and fierce. "I gave you my name, and with it my protection. I mean to honor that." Something warm unfurled in Thea's chest at his words. Over the past 2 weeks, she had come to respect this quiet, determined man who had rescued her from an impossible situation. His steadfastness, his integrity, his gentle consideration, all these qualities had gradually revealed themselves to her. And something else had changed too, something she was only beginning to acknowledge to herself. The way her heart quickened when he smiled at her across the breakfast table. The fluttering in her stomach when their hands accidentally touched while passing dishes. The sense of rightness she felt in this house with this man. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Their eyes met, and for a moment, Thea thought he might say something more. Instead, he nodded and returned to cleaning his rifle. That night, a thunderstorm rolled across the plains, bringing with it sheets of rain and jagged forks of lightning that illuminated the bedroom in stark flashes. Unable to sleep, Thea wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and made her way downstairs for a cup of tea. She found Quentin already in the kitchen, staring out the window into the stormy night, a mug of coffee clutched in his hands. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. He turned, offering a tired smile. "Storm always makes me restless. You, the same." She moved to the stove, lighting the burner to heat water for tea. "My mother used to say thunderstorms were just the angels rearranging furniture in heaven." Quentin's smile widened. "My pa said it was God bowling." Thea laughed, the sound bright in the cozy kitchen. "I like that." They sat at the table as the storm raged outside, talking in low voices about nothing of consequence: childhood memories, favorite books, the first time each had ridden a horse. It was the longest conversation they'd had, and Thea found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't since before her father's ultimatum. "I never thanked you properly," she said during a lull in their conversation. "For marrying me, it was an extraordinary thing to do for someone you barely knew." Quentin studied her over the rim of his mug. "I knew enough," he said simply. "I'd seen you in town at church, heard you playing the piano at the schoolhouse Christmas pageant last year. You were always kind to people others overlooked: old Mrs. Winters, the Jacobson boy with his twisted foot." Thea felt her cheeks warm. "You noticed all that?" "I notice more than people think," he replied, a slight smile playing at his lips. "Always been quiet, so folks tend to forget I'm there. Makes for good observing." "And what did you observe about me?" Thea asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Quentin set down his mug, his expression turning serious. That you deserved better than what your father and Winstead had planned, that you have a gentle heart but a strong spine. That you're the kind of woman a man would be lucky to build a life with. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with something Thea couldn't quite name. A particularly loud crack of thunder made her jump, breaking the moment. "The storm's getting worse," Quentin said, rising from his chair. "We should try to get some sleep. Morning comes early." Thea nodded, suddenly aware of how intimate the scene must appear, the two of them in their night clothes, alone in the kitchen in the middle of the night. Yes, of course. "Good night, Quentin." "Good night, Thea." As she climbed the stairs back to her room, Thea found herself wondering if the rapid beating of her heart was due to the thunder or something else entirely. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed the world clean. Thea rose early, determined to check on her fledgling garden, which had likely benefited from the heavy rain. She was surprised to find Quentin already outside, examining something by the barn. "What is it?" she called, making her way across the muddy yard. His expression was grim as he turned to her. "Someone was here last night, during the storm." A chill ran down Thea's spine. "How do you know?" He pointed to a set of boot prints in the mud leading from the road to the barn and back. "These weren't here yesterday evening." They followed the tracks to the barn, where Quentin slid open the heavy wooden door with caution. Inside, everything appeared undisturbed at first glance, the horses nickering softly in their stalls, the tack hanging neatly on the wall. Maybe they were just seeking shelter from the storm. Thea suggested hopefully. Quentin shook his head, pointing to a pile of hay in the corner. "Look." Thea moved closer, then gasped. Partially buried in the hay was an oil lamp turned over, the glass broken. Had it been lit when it fell, the entire barn could have gone up in flames with all the animals inside. "They're escalating," Quentin said, his voice hard. This wasn't mischief, this was attempted arson. Fear clutched at Thea's heart. "What do we do?" Before Quentin could answer, they heard the sound of approaching horses. Quentin moved to the barn door, positioning himself in front of Thea as 4 riders approached. Harold Winstead himself, flanked by 3 of his men. "Nash," Winstead called, his voice carrying across the yard. "Time we settled this matter once and for all." Quentin's hand moved to his hip where his pistol was holstered. "Stay here," he told Thea. "No," she replied firmly. "This concerns me too." Together, they stepped out of the barn to face the men who had been terrorizing them for weeks. Winstead sat atop his horse like a king surveying his domain, his florid face twisted in a sneer. "Good morning to you, Mrs. Nash," he said, the title dripping with mockery. "Or should I still call you Miss Montgomery, since this sham of a marriage won't be lasting much longer?" "What do you want, Winstead?" Quentin demanded. "I think I've made that quite clear." Winstead's eyes fixed on Thea. "The girl, your father and I had an agreement, and I intend to honor it." "I made no such agreement," Thea replied, her voice steadier than she felt, "and I'm a married woman now." Winstead laughed, an ugly sound. "A marriage that can be easily annulled. Your father has already spoken to Judge Phillips. All it takes is your signature, acknowledging the marriage was never consummated." Thea felt heat rush to her face at the crude implication. Beside her, Quentin had gone rigid with anger. "My wife isn't going anywhere with you," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Now get off my property before I remove you myself." Winstead's expression darkened. "You're outnumbered, Nash. Be reasonable. Take the money we're offering and find yourself another woman, one who isn't already spoken for." "I was never yours," Thea said, anger replacing her fear. "And I never will be. I chose Quentin of my own free will, and I choose him still." Something in her words seemed to reach Quentin. He glanced at her, his eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You heard my wife," he said, turning back to Winstead. "Now leave." Winstead's face contorted with rage. "You'll regret this defiance, both of you." He jerked his chin at his men. "Take her." Everything happened at once. 2 of Winstead's men dismounted, moving toward Thea with clear intent. Quentin drew his pistol in a smooth motion, firing a warning shot into the air. "Next one won't miss," he warned, positioning himself in front of Thea. One of the men hesitated, but the other reached for his own gun. Before he could draw, another shot rang out, not from Quentin's weapon, but from the direction of the house. All heads turned to see Sheriff Dawson and 3 deputies approaching, rifles at the ready. "That's enough." The sheriff called, "Put those weapons down, all of you." Surprise flickered across Winstead's face. "Dawson, what the hell are you doing here?" The sheriff dismounted, approaching with his rifle still raised. "Got a telegram from the circuit judge. Seems there's been some complaints about harassment and property damage out this way." His eyes narrowed. "And attempted arson from the looks of that barn." "This is a private matter," Winstead growled. "Between me and Nash, not anymore it ain't," Sheriff Dawson replied. "Judge takes a dim view of men who try to burn down their neighbor's property, or who try to force a woman into marriage against her will." Thea could hardly believe what she was hearing. She had been certain the sheriff was in Winstead's pocket, as Quentin had said. "Sheriff," she ventured. "I don't understand." Dawson's weathered face softened slightly. "Your husband rode into town late last night, Mrs. Nash, brought evidence of the harassment you folks have been suffering, statements from witnesses who'd been too scared to speak up before." Thea looked at Quentin in surprise. "He hadn't mentioned going to town during the storm, waited till you were asleep," he explained quietly. "Didn't want to worry you." Sheriff Dawson turned his attention back to Winstead. "Now then, you and your men are going to turn around and ride back to your own property. There'll be an investigation into these incidents, and I expect you to cooperate fully." "This is outrageous," Winstead sputtered. "Montgomery won't stand for this." "Thomas Montgomery's been arrested already," the sheriff said flatly, "for conspiracy to commit forced marriage. Judge takes that real serious." Thea felt as if the ground had dropped from beneath her feet, her father arrested. Despite everything, she had never imagined such an outcome. "You can't do this," Winstead insisted, though there was a note of uncertainty in his voice now. "Already done," Sheriff Dawson replied. "Now, are you going to leave peacefully, or do my deputies need to escort you to a cell next to Montgomery's?" Fury and disbelief warred on Winstead's face, but he was no fool. With a final venomous glance at Quentin and Thea, he wheeled his horse around. "This isn't over," he spat, before galloping away, his men following close behind. The sheriff watched them go, then turned to Quentin and Thea. "They shouldn't bother you anymore, but keep that rifle handy just in case." "Thank you, Sheriff," Quentin said, holstering his pistol. "I appreciate you coming out here," Dawson nodded. Never did like Winstead much, too used to getting his own way. He tipped his hat to Thea. "Madam, you'll need to come into town tomorrow to give your statement, if you don't mind." "Of course," Thea agreed. After the sheriff and his deputies had ridden away, Thea turned to Quentin, 1,000 questions in her eyes. "You went to town during the storm, gathered evidence," he shrugged, suddenly looking uncomfortable with her scrutiny. "It needed to be done. I couldn't let them keep threatening you." "But you could have been hurt, riding in such weather, or Winstead's men could have caught you." "Worth the risk," he said simply. Thea studied him, this man who had married her to save her from one fate and had risked himself to save her from another. Without thinking, she reached up to touch his cheek gently. "Thank you," she whispered. Quentin went very still, his eyes searching hers. "Thea," he said, his voice rough, "what you said to Winstead about choosing me—" "I meant it," she admitted, her heart pounding. "At first, I accepted your proposal because I had nowhere else to go, but now I would choose you regardless of circumstances." For a long moment, he said nothing, and Thea feared she had misread the situation entirely. Then slowly, he covered her hand with his own, turning his face to press a kiss to her palm. "I've been half in love with you for 2 years," he confessed. "Since I saw you teaching the children to sing at the Christmas pageant. I never thought I'd have the courage to speak to you, let alone offer you my name." Joy blossomed in Thea's chest, unexpected and overwhelming. "And I never thought I'd find happiness in a marriage arranged out of necessity." "It doesn't have to be just a marriage of convenience," Quentin said softly. "If you don't want it to be." In answer, Thea rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. Unlike the brief, chaste kiss they had shared at their wedding, this one was warm and real, full of promise and awakening desire. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "I think," Thea said, a smile spreading across her face, "that I would very much like to be a true wife to you, Quentin Nash." The transformation of their relationship was as gradual as it was profound. That night, Thea moved her belongings from the spare room to Quentin's larger bedroom, and they discovered together the joys of married life that went beyond companionship. In the days that followed, the comfortable routine they had established took on new dimensions, lingering touches as they passed each other in the kitchen. Stolen kisses in the barn, tender moments by the fire in the evenings. In town the next day, Thea gave her statement to the circuit judge, detailing Winstead's threats and her father's attempt to force her into marriage. It was difficult, exposing family matters to public scrutiny, but Quentin's steady presence beside her gave her strength. "You did well," he told her as they left the courthouse. "I'm proud of you." They were walking toward their wagon when a familiar figure appeared, her father, being led from the jailhouse by Sheriff Dawson, his hands shackled before him. Thomas Montgomery looked older than Thea remembered, his shoulders stooped, his face haggard. Their eyes met across the dusty street, and for a moment, Thea saw something like regret flicker across his features. Then his gaze hardened and he looked away, allowing the sheriff to guide him toward the stagecoach that would take him to the county seat for trial. "Do you want to speak to him?" Quentin asked quietly. Thea considered the question, then shook her head. "Not today, perhaps someday, but not now." Quentin nodded, understanding in his eyes. He took her hand, squeezing it gently. "Let's go home." Home. The word had taken on new meaning in the past month. It was no longer just a place of shelter, but a sanctuary they were building together day by day. Winstead and her father both faced charges for their actions. While Thomas Montgomery eventually received a fine and a stern warning from the judge, Winstead's attempt at arson earned him 6 months in the territorial prison. The scandal diminished his standing in the community, and many of his business associates distanced themselves from him. As summer gave way to autumn, Thea found herself settling deeper into life at the Nash ranch. Her garden flourished, providing vegetables for their table and enough to preserve for winter. She took over the household accounts, discovering a talent for numbers that complemented Quentin's practical knowledge of ranching. "We make a good team," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple. Thea leaned against his shoulder, content in a way she had never imagined possible. "Yes, we do." In late September, as the aspen trees turned golden on the distant hillsides, Thea woke one morning with a sudden realization. After counting days in her head, she turned to Quentin, who was pulling on his boots at the edge of the bed. "I think," she said carefully, "that we might be expecting a child." Quentin froze, one boot on, one boot off. "A child," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are you certain?" "Not entirely," Thea admitted, "but it's been 2 months since." She blushed, still somewhat shy about discussing such matters directly. A slow smile spread across Quentin's face, transforming it with joy. He abandoned his boot and moved to gather her in his arms. "A baby," he marveled, his hand gently covering her still flat stomach. "Our baby, Doctor." Mitchell confirmed Thea's suspicion the following week. "Expect the little one around April," he told them with a smile, "a spring baby." As winter settled over the Colorado plains, bringing with it short days and long, cozy evenings by the fire, Thea found herself reflecting on the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this life. Had her father not insisted she marry Winstead, had Quentin not been riding past that fateful morning, had she not found the courage to accept his offer, how different everything might have been. Any regrets? Quentin asked one snowy evening, seeming to read her thoughts as they sat together on the sofa, his hand resting protectively over the gentle swell of her growing belly. Thea smiled, covering his hand with her own. "Not one," she said. "Sometimes the greatest blessings come from the most unexpected circumstances. Like being banished by your father," he teased gently. "Like a cowboy next door offering his name," she corrected, leaning up to kiss him. When their son was born the following April, a healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and a shock of dark hair, they named him Samuel, after Quentin's father. Holding him in her arms, with Quentin beside her, his face alight with love and pride. Thea knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home. Over the years that followed, their family and ranch prospered together. Thea eventually reconciled with her father, who, humbled by his public disgrace and the loss of Winstead's friendship, came to respect the strength and determination of the daughter he had once dismissed. Two more children joined the family, a daughter, Eliza, and another son, James, filling the once quiet house with laughter and activity. And every year, on the anniversary of the morning Quentin had found Thea on the road with her satchel, they would sit together on the porch, watching the sun rise over the Colorado plains. Grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together, a desperate young woman with nowhere to turn, and the quiet cowboy who had offered her his name and, ultimately, his heart.